Hello, welcome back to Madrona's Pulse Teachings. I hope this finds you doing well. We are in the astrology for the week ahead, and this week carries us into 2025. So I hope this finds you doing well. If you've been enjoying the holiday season, that's wonderful. If they have been full of stress and or grief, then my wish is that this video can just be a little pocket when you can kind of escape and you can tune in to yourself and these cosmic energies and the cosmic symphony, because we are coming into a cosmic symphony this week. So I am talking about December 30th through January 5th. So that's the astro weather I'm going to look at. And we start out December 30th with our Capricorn New Moon. So there's two major cosmic forces working with us this week, cosmic stories, let's say that. And that is that we come into this week with a Capricorn New Moon, and that we are going to come into the exact opposition between Pluto and Mars. Okay, there's other aspects and conversations happening, and I will mention them, but just knowing that as we're going in, that is kind of the major trajectory of this week. And those are two different energies. Okay, so we start out this week with the Capricorn New Moon. That is happening at between 9 and 10 degrees of Capricorn. We've got the sun and the moon together. I do have a video just on that Capricorn moon if you want to listen to that. Or if you've listened to it and you want to listen again, I'll link it below. And here, just knowing that we start the week out in this pulling in yin moment, because a Capricorn New Moon is pulling us in to a quietude from which we can connect with the Capricorn archetype, which is also in this instance literally talking to its ruler. The new moon is sextiling Saturn, who is in Pisces. And that's talking to our Saturn, our Capricorn archetype at a new moon, the dark moon, trying to turn off the noise, of what we're supposed to do, of how we're supposed to be, of how we're supposed to show up, and just allowing us to really just be. And from that place, seeing what emerges. Maybe you do get some clarity around intentions, that if you are someone that sets intentions for 2025, if you are someone that does that, it is lovely to do that from a very quiet place this year, because of the astro weather that's carrying us into the new year. Really getting quiet. Not necessarily just doing what we think we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to show up. But this is a Capricorn New Moon talking to the Saturn. This Saturn is squaring Jupiter all week. This is about the structures and the realignments for our soul path. Doesn't really get more real than that. Okay, and just knowing that some of the themes of Capricorn and Saturn do have to do with boundaries. So we're coming into this week wanting to get into a quiet place, maybe moving a little bit more slowly than we even feel like we're supposed to be moving. Really trying to let go of supposed to be's this week, if and when we can. A lot of us are conditioned to show up in the supposed to be. We can spend years, I have spent years, trying to unlearn those supposed to be's. We can really tap into that this week, so that we can just witness what we need to witness, where we are on our path, what is opening up to us. Okay. Before this week, we had this strong conversation between Saturn and Jupiter, and also Mercury. And that could have been a lot. It could have been a lot feeling it. As we come into this week, the Mercury moves on its journey. And so now we're just with the Saturn and the Jupiter. So we also might have a little bit more space to feel in to how the structures in our life are wanting to realign. And the new moon can take us right into that. Okay, also noting that this new moon comes out of what happened on the 29th, which is at Chiron station direct. Okay, so on Sunday, Chiron stationed direct at 19 degrees of Aries. And so we're also coming into this week with a Chiron who's just changed directions. Chiron itself is deep, 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 deep soul wounds and healing. Soul wounds that are in the psyche. And in Aries, they're about ourself. They also, Chiron can speak to us in Aries through the body, because the Aries does bring up the body, but it is speaking to us about, the body's relationship to psyche, because Chiron is always related to psyche and soul. And that Chiron gestation direct. So there also could be some tenderness. There could be some grief coming up. There could be some grief with this new moon. A Capricorn new moon itself can take us into those dark crevices that we don't always spend time in, that we are taught not to bring into the mainstream world or professional life, or we don't talk about that. This new moon, especially with that Chiron with Saturn, some of those kind of pockets within ourselves, they could come up and we could be asked to look in there, and we do not need to fear looking in there. Okay, I don't know why, I just got like that big smile. I felt this big smile as I thought about us looking in there, because there's so much fear built up around looking in those quiet places, those yin pockets of our selfhood. And yet that's where we can enter into this deep, deep intimacy with ourselves. And in Capricorn, that's an intimacy with Saturn. That's an intimacy with our deep elder wisdom. Okay, we were just talking about the bone mother and Celtic spirituality in our meeting in the New Moon Zoom in Patreon, and she lives in us, that elder old crone energy, and she is tied to Saturn and Capricorn. She is, in some archetypes, she's the elder medicine woman who lives alone in the mountains with animals and plants and plant medicine and wisdom, right? She has so many different versions in different cultures, and yet wisdom. Okay, and so when we go into those pockets of ourselves, yes, sometimes there's grief and there's fear, and there's also a lot of wisdom. And that is a gift both of Saturn, Capricorn, and also of Chiron. Okay, so that energy carries us into this week. That said, it's powerful, it's potent. It also is asking us to slow down. And it also is a yin moment, okay? And then, of course, we come into the new year. We have our New Year's Eve that carries us into the new year. And we are really coming into the Mars-Pluto opposition. So we start out this week with Mars and Pluto within 1 degree of each other. So just to recap, we are talking about Pluto, who is at that 1st degree of Aquarius. And we are talking about our Mars retrograde, who is currently at those beginning degrees of Leo. Okay. And at the end of this week, on January 6th, that Mars is going to pop into Cancer. Okay. So we're going to have a major energy shift as we end this week. But before we get there, Mars has to go back to 0 degrees of Leo. And as it goes back to 0 degrees of Leo, it has a conversation with Pluto. And we're in that conversation. Okay. And so this energy is building. It's building on New Year's Eve. It's going to carry us into the new year, and it's going to be exact coming into the 2nd and the 3rd of January. Okay, now this energy can play out in so many different ways. There's a lot of archetypes that come alive with this conversation. But, I think it's really important to acknowledge that Pluto is about our soul's evolution, and Mars is about our desire. And when these two get together, okay, if we have a lot of those pockets I was talking about that we haven't looked at, that we haven't spent time with, and a lot of times in those pockets, that's where we have some of our kind of past stories, whether it's trauma, stored grief that we haven't processed, stories of loss. If we have a lot of that hasn't been looked at, this conversation between Mars and Pluto, it can trigger that. It can trigger that in other folks. And then we can react from those kind of wounded places. And yet, this is asking us to come into attunement with how our own personal desire to be a creative, joyful being can and wants to align with our soul's calling that is unconscious and in the process of becoming conscious for pure, true authenticity. There doesn't need to be anything explosive about that. But if we're not spending time with ourselves, if we're not tending to ourselves, if we're not allowing ourselves to dip into our needs, and we're covering it over and we're just putting another layer of a triage bandage on there, and these are emotional wounds usually that also of course come in through the body, sometimes chronic pain, then things get triggered and out of whack, and that's when this Mars-Pluto opposition can really cause a lot of drama. Okay, but in our own personal lives, we can really listen. We can really journey with this and ask the question, what is my creative yearning right now? What is my authentic calling? How can those big questions be seen in this little seemingly unrelated drama that's coming up, where this person is really pushing my boundaries, or I'm really feeling fear in this moment, however it's happening? Okay, so we want to try and move through this week, especially as we come out of the new moon and into the new year, mindfully, with, self-care. Because whenever we have a big cosmic conversation like this, and it is big and it's part of a process, remembering that Mars is going to go retrograde and it's going to go back into Cancer, and I can't wait to talk about that Mars in Cancer, because I love the Mars in Cancer energy that's allowing us to access. But first we have to get there. And that's what this week is about, literally, because at the end of this week, Mars pops back into Cancer. Okay, so we are relearning our primal drive. We are relearning our embodiments of a creative drive, what it means to be a creative being, what it means to have an active drive that aligns to my heart. Okay, Leo does not need to seek drama. It does not need to create drama. It does not need to be the center of attention. What it needs is to access its heart's yearning to be a creative being. And when it hasn't been able to do that in an authentic way, which is opposite, which is Aquarius, which we are in a 20-year journey learning about, so this is literally the beginning, well, that's when it gets in a vicious loop, and then it starts needing to be the center. Then it starts needing attention. But that attention fills in, it's a vicious circle, and it's not actually giving the person who's acting all of that trauma out what they need, which is self-love, because through self-love, we connect into our heart space, and then we're connected to the divine energy flowing through, and then we get to shine that out in the world. And so that's what this is ultimately seeking to help us do on a really, really deep level. And that's coming up this week. Okay. In addition to that, before we hit the exact Mars Pluto opposition, we have Venus make her entry into Pisces. Okay, so that's January 2nd. That's a lovely start to the new year. So Venus, who really brings us into our values, who brings us into how our values want to go into our relationships, how they want to speak of love in our life, how they want to pour love into so many different types of relationships, including self-love. That Venus is going to go into Pisces. And when Venus is in Pisces, this is a season to bring in art, to bring in dream, to bring in, I'm thinking of like the romantics of literature, of bringing in that kind of almost nostalgia that really does characterize kind of the romantic period, just of bringing in beauty, of leaning into your own art creativity process and practices and inviting the flow. Okay, so Venus is here, that divine feminine energy shifts into Pisces, and then Mars comes into its exact opposition with Pluto. So just knowing that there is that other kind of divine feminine energy flowing with us that can also nurture and heal. Especially if you are moving through a period of grief, if it's in your body, if it's in your psyche, if you're in a hard moment, that Venus in Pisces can be quite healing. And so leaning into that if and when you need to. And then just noting that as we move to the end of the week, January 3rd, our sun, who started out this week right around 9 degrees for our new moon. That sun is going to come into its exact conjunction with Pallas Athena, because the new moon itself is conjunct Pallas Athena. So bringing in that divine feminine energy. And everything I said about the wise woman archetype, that just got upped because Pallas is there for the new moon. And they're going to be exact in their conjunction at 14 degrees of Capricorn, 13 to 14 degrees of Capricorn on the 3rd. And as that happens, the sun comes into its exact sextile with Saturn. Okay. So again, bringing in just, and that's lovely because that's happening as the Pluto Mars conversation is going on. So really leaning into our grounded, wise self. And the Capricorn energy, Capricorn does not get flustered in a drama reactive argument. I mean, it can, but Capricorn wisdom, it wants to step back. It wants to assess the situation. It wants to check in with its boundaries. Pallas Athena there in Capricorn, she knows her boundaries. So really, really listening to your boundaries. In Capricorn, our body is what tells us about our boundaries. So if you've committed to something and you just have this headache that won't go away and you don't really want to go, but you kind of think you're supposed to go, or you feel like you have to go for various family or work obligations, and that headache is there, or that nausea, that stomach will not, maybe you don't go. Maybe you actually say, I can't. And maybe you stay home and you nurture yourself and the headache goes away or the nausea releases. Okay, listening to the body. If the throat is like all full and you can't really express yourself, is it the time to be in this conversation? Is it the time to be having this conversation? Or should you really just say, you know what? I don't feel good. I got to go home. Just really feeling into boundaries this week because they are important. There's a lot of wisdom there, and they're also going to protect us and ground us during this big energy between Mars and Pluto. Okay, with that, I now get to say Happy New Year, sending blessings, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.